You were born in Lvov.
If you wish, in Lvov.
Please.
Yeah.
Please. You were born in Lvov, but you didn't stay there very long. You moved to Krakow pretty quickly.
I was born in my grandmother's, in my grandparents' bed, you know, and stayed, I would imagine, about 2 weeks at most, and went back. At that time, it wasn't directly to Krakow. We went to Bochnia because my father was employed by the bank, and they sent him to Bochnia, I believe, for a year or something. So we had a villa there, which was which was renting to us and so forth. And so I spent, I think, about a year in Bochnia, but in a pram, of course, you know. And afterwards, immediately to Krakow, and of course spent until the outbreak of war, with once a year a journey to Lvov, to my grandparents. But as such, it was Krakow. So I am a semper fidelis for both Lvov and Krakow.
Yes. So your childhood really was in Krakow?
My childhood, Krakow.
Plus
absolutely.
Occasional visits to Lvov?
Occasional at Easter time, Passover, we went to my grandparents. My mother and I, and then my mother and my little brother and myself. Not my father, who was working, but he couldn't go. But we went once a year.
You weren't
and it
really...
it was quite an adventure, of course. Going by train and this, it was very adventurous.
Tell me more about traveling to Lvov and how you
It was
saw
wonderful.
it as a child.
We loved it. Looked forward to it. I would imagine all through the year, because it was an adventure for a child like this, going by train and so on. And of course I remember that very well, because it was a fast train at the time, so I can't tell you exactly how many hours, 5, 6 hours maybe. Didn't stop at all at all stations, but it certainly stopped in the large ones, and one of them was Przemyśl. So, of course, when it stopped at Przemyśl, my mother and my father had family in Przemyśl, so the entire family came out. Everybody came out with food, so that poor children shouldn't starve going on the train all these hours and all that. So the family were waiting on the platform, one after another, after another, after another. This brought this brought the eggs, and the hot soup, and you can't imagine. You can't imagine. And it was great fun. Of course, my mother, this was, her family, and so it was.
Just checking, because
it was great fun. It was very nice. So we stopped for about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. It was the main stopover. And then we arrived in Lvov, and my grandfather would wait for us with horse and buggy and took us home. And it was wonderful, except that I had a lot of young, about the same age as myself. They were not really cousins, because my mother was the only child. So my mother was one of 8, actually, the firstborn, but the other 7 died within a month of birth. So she was the only one. So it was actually their cousins' children, so removed, once removed or so. And at first I was terribly unhappy, because whenever I opened my mouth, they were laughing their heads off, and I didn't understand why, because I didn't say anything very funny, but they were laughing their heads off. And listen to her, what is she saying? How is she talking? They didn't understand. If I said shoes, they were not shoes, they were meszty, the language was quite different in Lvov, and particularly the dialect, and I spoke a Krakowian Polish, so it was awful. But after a few days, I got accustomed and I spoke the way they spoke. So that was fine. But by the time I got back to Krakow, I had the same problem the other way around. The other way around. More tea?
No, thank you.
No.
Good.
So, but as such, it was wonderful. Great fun. And we had Passover with my grandparents, my grandparents were very religious, very religious. Opposite to what I had at home. We had none of that at home. We were very secular and so forth. But my grandparents were very religious, so my grandfather would the ceremony of the Passover night, Seder night, so called, was truly something out of today. You would know that this is the way one actually celebrates a holiday like this. So he would be all dressed in white, and his hair was white, and his beard was white, and what he was wearing was like a white sheet almost, I don't know, some kind of it. And he would sit on the bed, propped up by pillows, as the Bible says one should do. And it lasted and lasted and lasted until we could have a little bit of something to eat. There was so much that he had to pray towards the food. And then I had to ask what was known as 4 questions. And I had to ask it, and I asked in Hebrew, because I was going to a Hebrew kindergarten in Krakow, and I could speak Hebrew. And I asked these questions in Hebrew, the 4 questions. And my grandfather was very proud, and so he started telling us the story of what is known as Haggadah, which is, the story of Passover, of the poor people going away from Egypt and so on. And it took a long, long, long time, half the night. And the best thing that I looked forward to every year was first best thing to eat was an egg, a hard-boiled egg, dipped in salt water. I didn't want anything after that, but that was, we were hungry, we were starving, we couldn't eat before this egg and so on. So that happened every year, and every year my grandfather asked me, what would you like, what present would you like? And every year I asked for the same thing, for a watch, because by the time I came next year, the watch was gone meantime. So the following day he went with me to a jeweler and chose a watch for me, and I was very happy to get a new watch, and that's how it was.
Would it break or would you lose it, the watch?
Probably lose it. No, it never broke. No. I had to, but God knows I can't tell you how it is that every single year there was a watch.
You needed a watch.
And I didn't have a collection. I had this one at home. Yeah.
How was it like, because you said at home, your parents, they weren't very religious.
No.
So
my father was altogether was an agnostic, completely not. My mother was very traditionally Jewish. And whatever she did in order for her parents' sake. So, not to upset them, not to offend them. So she would, every Friday evening, we would have the candles, and she would, pray at the candles. And this was like she would do if she were in her parents' home. Out of sheer respect for her parents. But it had nothing whatsoever to do with my father. So, we were there, we did. And every Friday there was a parcel delivered from my grandmother, who a challah, which she made herself, and some rogaliki, all sort of nice things, every single Friday. So we should have it for Shabbat. Yeah. And on the other hand, my mother, on the other side, she would write on Wednesday or Tuesday or whatever, always a card to my parents. She would write it in Yiddish to them, that they should get it for Friday for Shabbat.
So you spoke Polish at home,
Oh, yes.
and your grandparents' house was
Also,
that Polish?
also, they
Not
spoke
Yiddish.
with me, yes, Polish, absolutely, yes.
And then you knew Hebrew. You learned Hebrew as a...
Yeah, because I was in the Hebrew kindergarten. But that wasn't the language was actually, the language was Polish. But we also spoke Hebrew. We learned Hebrew songs. We learned, all sorts of things which had to do with the language. Praying, to pray, child's pray at night before it goes to bed in Hebrew and so on. But other than that, it was always in Polish. Everything was in Polish, yeah.
Tell me more about the Hebrew kindergarten. What was it like?
Wonderful, beautiful, great kindergarten. It was like, I would say, I think I know exactly where it was now when I'm in Krakow. I can more or less, it may be within a house here or a house there, but as such, it would have been there. It was like a villa with a beautiful garden. And I can't tell you how many children there were, but I was the youngest. I was always everywhere the youngest. And it was terrible from that point of view, because nobody wanted to play. I was young. I was 3 years of age, I think. And they started, they accepted children from 4 or something like that. I was always a year behind. The same thing at school, yes. And so that was very difficult because I had to pass all sorts of tests to be admitted. But it was great fun and it was very nice. I loved it. And many, 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 many years afterwards, after the war, in Israel, we came across the owners, the ones who were the teachers and the owners of that kindergarten, who were in Israel, survived the war somehow and were there.
Tell me about your friends from kindergarten, the famous Dupa story.
No. Everybody wants to know about Gabrish, and Gabrish, I can tell you about him. I have to demonstrate. When I talk about Gabrish, I must demonstrate it because he was amazing. He was really amazing. I think he would have been 5, maybe. He must have been. Yes. I learned that I'll come to it a little later, but I think he was born 2 years before me. So he would have been 5. And he had this group of boys, and he was the king. Herrscht, like, oh. And he would stand there with his hands in his pockets, looking down at everyone. And they couldn't cope with him. He was impossible, God rest him, impossible. And they only kept this child because he was the grandson of the very famous, very highly respected rabbi, of the chief rabbi from the temple, Dr. Ozia Stone, and he was known as Gabrish Ton. That wasn't his surname. His surname was Rost, but nobody knew. So they only kept him because of this amazing, wonderful Dr. Ton, who was a senator at the same time and the chief rabbi here, an orator. He was an outstanding man. So they kept this boy, but he was totally uncontrollable. I remember him. I don't remember anybody else. I don't know about anybody there. Can't remember. But he was totally uncontrollable. And so, you know how it is. I mean, everybody wanted to be in his group, but it was just like that. I was małe piwo, not so. So when I asked him once, I don't know how I cropped up the courage to even ask him. I don't know how I managed to do that. He looked at me, he gave me a look. I was like that. I was nothing, I tell you. And then one day, one day he said that to me, all right, okay, but remember, you've got to go home, and when you have at lunch, when you're at lunch, and when it's all silent, because I imagine you're not allowed to speak at lunch, are you? You know, like this, that's how we talk. You have to say it very loud. I said, I can't. All right, no is no, no is no, goodbye. It was terrible. It really was terrible. And so this was my dream, to be able to do what these boys are doing. I never wanted to play with these little girls, with the dolls. It was so uninteresting. But the boys had games, the trees, you know, it was fun. So there it was. I came home, you know what happened. I don't need to tell you. And so the silence.
Please do tell me.
To tell you, I was having soup. I was having soup and I didn't know how to do it and how to manage, how to say it. And so while I was having the soup, I set it into the soup almost, you know. My father said, did you say something? What did you just say? No. Yes, you said something. What did you just say? You have to tell me. What did you just say? Oh my God, it was terrible. So I said, well, I had to say because Gabrish, who is Gabrish? What Gabrish? What? so I said, Gabrish, well, you know, Gabrish at school, you know, everybody should know who Gabrish was, you know. No? So what did he want you to say? What did he want you to say? So I said, I can't say it. You have to say it. What did he want you to say? So I had to say it. You can't imagine the commotion at the table. My father to my mother, my mother, where are we sending this child? Nobody referred to me per name. I was a child. Where are you sending this child? To what kind of a kindergarten where they use such language? What sort of a language is that to use to a child? A terrible commotion. So, but never mind, the following morning I came and Gabriel stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked down at me with a quirk and a smile. I said, so? And he said, I think you said it. I said, yes, I said it twice I said it. Oh, he said, all right, come, you can be with us. But what he said before, but beforehand he said, when you come back tomorrow and you tell me, Fitz, I know that when you're lying, I will know, so remember. Now,
You impressed him.
Oh, I impressed him, but he impressed me. Oh, he impressed everyone. He impressed. Now, as we are on the subject of Gabrish, I have always thought about this boy when I was, older and so, thinking, he must have survived somewhere. He must have survived. He was such a tough cookie. He must have survived. I've got to try and see, maybe I can. Little did I know that his name was Rost. I didn't know that. I knew Gabriel Stone.
Mm-hmm.
When in Krakow, in 1945, they opened up what was known as a committee, Jewish committee, Komitet Żydowski, where everybody met. Whoever came, whoever from wherever, from camps, the first steps were directed to there, looking for people, and there were one or two people who are running, of course, isn't one of them was Dr. I forget her first name, Rost, Dr. Rost. And she later on took my testimony from me, which is in a book, Children Accuse. It's called Children Accuse, and I gave the testimony of survival and so on. And it was Dr. Rost who took that. And that was his mother. But I had no idea then. I had no idea. And I kept asking, I kept more or less the group, age group people. Have you any idea? Did you ever see? Do you know? Have you heard of such a boy called so and so and so? Nobody knew, nobody knew. Not very long ago, no, we were going with Peter, with my, to Krakow, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times a year. And whenever we were in Krakow, we went to the Jewish cemetery because I wanted to put a big plate there for my family that perished and so on and so on. So we were going. On one occasion, we, instead of going back this way, we went that way. And as we were walking through a main sort of thoroughfare, at the end of it, at the very end, I see a huge black, whatever, tablet, huge things. I said, that's very interesting. Let's have a look. What is this here? Like it wasn't an old one. It was something that would have been put on recently, say after the war anyway, definitely. And we come closer, and it is a symbolic one for Dr. Ozia Stone. And it tells you all about him, senator, this, that, his entire life, and at the very bottom, and his beloved grandson, Gabriel, something else, Gabriel, and there is another name, Rost, aged 12. Jak to tam pisało, sekundkę. Tortured at Montelupi. This was a terrible prison in Krakow. And perished in Auschwitz in 1942. 44 or something. He was 12. It was unbelievable what I saw. And it can't possibly be. This boy, he was so tough. He was so, how could, and I imagine it was because he was so tough that he didn't want to he must have been very difficult for them to they put him in prison like all the people. He was 2 years older than me. He was 2 years older than I, and he was 12. Torturowany na Montelupi, zginął w Auschwitz w roku 43 czy drugim. 42, tak.
To by miał 14.
14 miał wtedy. Był 2 lata ode mnie starszy. Dopiero to widziałam. Tak. This was a terrible shock for me, terrible shock. And from then on, every time we came, I went to the thing and put on a light, a candle, lit a candle for him, and so on, so on. And then one day we were going to go to Krakow, like we would have. And a friend of my mother's and mine says to me, Lili, I wonder if you could do me a favor. I have a very close friend in Krakow. She was a Krakowian, this lady here. And she says, I have a very close friend in Krakow. And she's not doing so very well. She's a little bit, health is not very good, and so on, so on. And